Hello, everyone, and welcome to what might be the very first episode of the Profit Hacking Podcast. I'm Stephen Darr. I've been interviewed a bunch of times, but I've never been on the other side of the mic, and so I'm giving it a shot. It's kind of a trial run, and I couldn't ask for a better first guest with Dan Martell. If you're unfamiliar, Dan is a multi-time entrepreneur who's exited for multi-million-dollar sums with Spheric partners, Spheric Technologies.
Tech, yeah.
Yeah, I was literally just told it 2 minutes ago. It went in one ear and out the other. Then also with Flowtown, which I was a user of, and Clarity, which I am currently still a user of. So, Dan, welcome.
Steve, man, thanks for having me. I'm pumped. I'm glad we're doing this.
Yeah, me too. It's funny. So Dan reached out to me, and I kind of had carte blanche as far as what I could come up with. And I had this idea of running a podcast for quite some time, and I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to ask him if he's down, and he was, so now we're here. So, Dan, you've now shifted a little bit in terms of what you're building as far as going from venture-backed large companies to what you're doing now. So I'd love to hear a little bit about the reason for the shift to what you're building currently, and a little bit about what you love about it.
Yeah, I mean, so what I'm doing now, so everybody knows, is essentially what I call an education company, which is no different than online programs, live events. There's actually a pretty if you go to danmartell.com/what's next, I actually wrote a lot about it, and I even start the blog post talking about how to make those decisions, because I've been in the fortunate position, which sounds crazy but is actually quite tough, to have to decide what are you going to do next multiple times in my career. You know, I started a company called Spheric. That one grew. We ended up exiting 30 people, millions in revenue. Then I did Flowtown, so I had to pick, what software company I wanted to work on next. Moved to San Francisco, did that, raised venture. Then I did Clarity, which was a totally complete software company. It was different. It was a marketplace. And then after that, which most people thought I would be either, another build another tech company, or do more angel investing or become a VC, I decided to actually, in some people's eyes, go step back and do information educational products. But the truth is what happened was last February, after I sold my company Clarity, moved to San Diego with the family, wanted to take a year off and do nothing. I got inspired by being around some incredible entrepreneurs. I started a YouTube channel to kind of document some of my beliefs and ideas around building a business and living life for my boys. I've got two young kids that are 2 and 3 years old. And that just parlayed into a community. So I grew my email list to over 10,000 people in 6 months. And I was like, I got to do something. They're like, they're sitting there going like, why are you putting out all this content? And it started with a group coaching program that I thought was pretty neat called the Lead Entrepreneurs. So just did a webinar one day and offered it up, and it was, it was a significant investment because I really wanted to work with really high caliber entrepreneurs, folks that are at kind of the 2 million mark trying to break 10 million in revenue. That turned into an incredible experience of being able to serve some incredible entrepreneurs. Then I decided to do an online program called Idea to Exit. 3 months after that, launched that, did very well. I don't know anything about this world. Luckily, I have a lot of friends that I've met over the years that are huge, and I didn't even know this. So shout out to Ramit Sethi, Derek Halper, and Lewis House. I mean, these guys are the pros, and I honestly thought they were just bloggers. So little did I know there were some very incredibly very profitable businesses. And then I've just kind of reinvested all that revenue into marketing and just really trying to get my story, my personal story out there, and some of the beliefs I have. So I do that through quote cards, my weekly YouTube videos, free webinars. So I mean, my free content is, my mission was always to make it better than most people's paid stuff. And then what's crazy is last November I did a live event in San Francisco with 50 entrepreneurs from around the world, from India to Italy. They all flew in, and I did 3 days of training with them and gave them my heart and soul. And that was really a transformative experience for me personally. A lot of people mentioned the same thing for them, and I just decided I want to do that. So it feeds my soul, and I want to do more of it.
Yeah, and in some ways you've been doing it for much longer than just this blog. I remember the first time I ever saw anything from you, it was a video. You were wearing the baby blue Clarity shirt. I don't remember the exact.
Now I'm wearing the black Dan Martell shirt, so
yeah,
always be representing.
Mm-hmm. And then I remember the first time we met in person was at 2014's Mastermind Talks, and I'd seen the video you spoke at the previous Mastermind Talks where you really got very real with the entire story of yourself as a teenager and then how you got into entrepreneurship and really were able to kind of focus a lot of things that maybe were driving you towards negative influences, but then redirect them into positive things, which was an incredible story. And I've been following your content on danmartell.com for pretty much since it started. I mean, the first time I saw you post, I was all over it, subscribed to the email list, commenting. And I love what you're saying, that you're trying to make your free stuff better than most people's paid stuff. That I believe Ramit is
he's
says
the
that
one that he's the one that said it. I took that from Ramit 100%.
Yeah, which is great. I mean, steal like an artist 100% is like my entire MO. There's very, very few original ideas in profit hacking. It's just, collecting everyone else's, like you said, a recent video, like being a belief collector. And I actually was reviewing the comments I've made on your blog in the past, and you said that sharing knowledge of what we learned and how to improve the future is a default start for the human race. It's the only reason why we have running water, iPhones, and capitalism. So you consider your responsibility to share what you've learned. And so it's great to hear that you made that comment over a year ago, and here you are still doing it, being so consistent every Monday and saying that it feeds your soul. So has it only gotten stronger for you the more you've kind of leaned into it?
Yeah, and this is the interesting part. You brought it up, and I've had probably a dozen friends say this to me when I kind of disclosed. January, I decided to go all in building this education company, and they go, yeah, it's about time. Like I've been, I did 1,300 clarity calls, which was me one-on-one coaching other entrepreneurs from around the world on how to build their software companies. I've always, my story growing up, I got in a lot of trouble as a teenager, ended up spending time with people at twice my age, getting into drugs, eventually went to rehab, and it was in rehab where I discovered computer programming, and it literally saved my life. And since then, I've gone back and kind of mentored all those kids. Every year I go 3 or 4 times a year to talk to the kids that are there and just been an example. So the part of me sharing my story and inspiring if I can, and supporting others, because I mean, if I could do it for people, I would, but I can't. The best I can do is kind of give them some ways of thinking or approaching life that I've learned the hard way that have seemed to contributed to any success that I've had. So I've always done this. I didn't just formalize it. So now, I'm all in. I'm in with the videos. I'm in with my live events. I now have entrepreneurs actually next week flying from, again, around the world to small town, my hometown of Moncton, New Brunswick, Canada, for an event called The Boardroom. I've got another big live event with 500 entrepreneurs in Toronto this September, my Idea to Exit Live. I mean, it's one of those things that once I decided to own it and go all in, then there were so many incredible people around the world that I had been influenced by some of my work, used my products, that wanted to support me. So, coming up with... in a couple weeks, I've got my new Idea to Exit Online launch, and I've got like 30 incredible partners that are going to be sharing that free mini course to all their members, and I just couldn't be more blessed and honored to have them involved.
Yeah, it's crazy because sometimes maybe I didn't make a true commitment, so I didn't believe but in the times where I have made a true commitment in the moment and then followed through with it, where when you decide on the what and the why behind it, the how has a way of working itself out. And so, if you want to have more of like a spiritual bend to it and saying the universe is going to coalesce in your favor, or if you want to have like a really practical, stoic way of saying it is you're just going to keep on working and working it until you figure it out. Either way, it ends up being, so long as you have that burning desire within you, things tend to work out.
I mean, that is my biggest pet peeve, and I did a video on this last year, which was just entrepreneurs need to make a freaking commitment. When I work with them and they're trying to break $1 million in revenue or trying to get to that next milestone, and I just go, you haven't decided. You have not made a decision, put a line in the sand and said, I'm going to do whatever it's going to take to achieve this outcome. And it's not about the how. We all know how to do stuff. We can Google, we can go on Core, you can use Clarity, you can, whatever. The information on how to do stuff, when you've got Mr. Googs out there that you can just find information. That's not the problem. The problem is that commitment, and then also the daily practices, right? I really believe that your weekly output is going to be a byproduct of your daily decision in that process. So I've got, a lot of things I've learned from the software world that I apply in business that have really allowed me to, scale businesses. Every company I've ever started, $1 million in revenue in the first 12 months. My last company, Clarity, $8 million in valuation in the first 4 months. That I know is a byproduct of a process, and it always starts with that commitment and then the daily actions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember you had a video you're saying kind of like the technology stuff, like force quits, where you'll charge your computer up and bring it out without your charger, go to a coffee shop, and the only time you work that day is that couple hour span. So, I need to be completely focused and diligent about staying on task, because otherwise I might not hit this deadline, or, I'm going to fall behind.
I mean, it's that I call them forcing functions, and there's a bunch of different ways you can apply it. I have a framework I've created, but even my favorite one that I just did right before we got on this call was scheduling working meetings. So if you're gonna delay something, and you're just historically a procrastinator around a certain type of work, schedule the meeting and actually get the other people that are going to be collaborating with it, and make it a work session. So you can do, Google Hangouts, you can do Skype, you can do whatever tool you want. You can just use a Google Doc and just talk through the phone, but make it a working session so it's in your calendar. You're not going to procrastinate, and it gets done. That is one of my favorite. There's obviously, some other ones, but I think hacking the default state that you have to put off important work. That's just intelligence, right? And I don't shy away from it. I acknowledge it, and I just work around it.
Yeah, and that's what I've really loved about your content is you do have a good mix of kind of like the tactical or the strategic stuff, which could be found, like you're saying, on Google, but I like the way that you deliver it. But also at the same time, you also have a lot of mix of kind of like the softer stuff, like knowing yourself and knowing how that applies to yourself as an entrepreneur or a leader or a team member, and then also just kind of the mental side of it, like how can you structure yourself to be able to withstand some of the tougher parts of being an entrepreneur. And I remember we had a conversation in the comments. It was a long time ago, but you're talking about positive stress, eustress, and some of the ways that you incorporate that into your life. And the one that always stuck out the most to me was I plan like I'm going to die in 5 years. So I'm just curious. I know that was a couple years ago, and so sometimes practices or habits kind of fall in and out. Do you have kind of what your next 5 years look like, or maybe you're in the middle of a 5-year stretch?
Well, so this is, maybe I didn't make it clear in the blog post, but I actually reset every quarter. So I mean, not only do I pretend I only got 5 years left, but I reset every quarter when I sit down to plan. Kind of, I don't believe, and there's a lot of people that have written about this, the 12-week year. Todd Herman's got the 90-day year. I've always joked with both those guys that I was going to do the 14,000 second year, just because the 12-week year, 90-day year. But I just believe, they've kind of identified that we work better in 90-day sprints. Now, it's kind of you would never make a decision as if I'm going to die tomorrow. You want to kind of have some long-range planning so that you can actually build a base and go for those goals that are going to take time. But, people have said it before that, we underestimate what we can get done in 10 years and overestimate what we can get done in 12 months. So I like the 90-day sprints to focus, but I'm always resetting that 5-year mark, always. And, I pretty much any day, if today was my last day, I could feel absolutely 100% okay with that, because I know I've really pushed and lived and done the things I want to do.
Yeah, I just finished a book called Die Empty, and it was a really great book. And one of the things he talked about was kind of what you were saying, that a lot of times people say, well, what would you do if today was your last day, or if you knew you were going to die tomorrow? Well, it's very different than what's most valuable for my business. If I knew I was going to die tomorrow, I'd spend all my time with my friends and my family. I'd write letters to everyone. I would do something I don't know, maybe try and create, and this actually would be useful for my business, maybe try and create some instructions for my vision, and hopefully just put it out there and say, if this is a good vision, I hope you pick it up.
So for example, have you done that yet?
Oh, no, I haven't.
See, that is what happened with me in my videos on YouTube. That was the reason I thought if something happened to me and I have my 2 young boys, they were babies at the time, and I didn't share that would never be captured. And the fact that you would do that, obviously I would encourage you to actually front load that over the next few months and start to put that together, because that is incredible. That's what I would love to read that from you, right? Like, what's your beliefs on life? How would you approach it? But that's what I love about that idea of not giving yourself unlimited amount of time. Like, oh, I've got another 40 years to live. It's no, you got 5. What would you want to have happen in 5? What you just did, it was cool, is you compressed that 5-year into a day. But I think there's something to be said. Like, if you had to answer that question, you might want to start unpacking those projects and put them over the next 90 days or next 6 months.
Totally. No, that's actually, because that wasn't what I was thinking about at all. Because where I was going in the book, he says, like, a better way to be more productive is, like, pretend as if, like, this is the one day of your life that, like, a reporter or journalist is going to be following you around every second, documenting it, and it's going to be, like, the record of your life that people will say, like, this is how Dan or this is how Steve operated, like, this is how he treated people, this is how he managed his time. So, did he spend his time, like, on Reddit, or did he spend his time, like, on something that, like, actually mattered to him? I mean, unless your
job is being an editor on Reddit.
Yeah, I was gonna say whoever is the guy that founded it, or if you're like one of those guys who are trying to like use Reddit as a marketing tool, and some people are doing it really effectively. I actually built like a 2,000 person email list in a weekend of one Reddit post, but yeah, it's interesting now to like even go deeper into like, and I'm gonna prioritize it is. Like the thing that probably means the most to me, I was doing a little bit of work about this last night, some journaling, is it's called one piece per. And basically about a year ago, I just started noticing there's a kind of a lot, not too much, but kind of a lot of trash, litter in Chicago. It's a beautiful city, and I know that the problem exists everywhere. So I just made this internal commitment to pick up at least one piece of trash or litter every single day and throw it away. And I'd be walking with family or friends, and they'd see me do it, and they'd kind of like look at me weird because I just picked up a cigarette butt off the ground. And so I told them about what I was doing, and other people started doing it too, or telling other people about it. It's like, that's kind of viral on a small scale. So I bought the domain one piece per. I hired a developer to build an SMS text-based app where it texts you every single day. It's like, have you picked up a piece of trash? And you say yes or no. And it keeps track of your stats, like your current streak, the total number you picked up. Eventually, like, I want to build an iOS and Android app that is gamified and has leaderboards and maybe has some incentives. So, ideally, I mean, it's a big number, but it's not that big of a number. If 100,000 active users are on it, that's 3 million pieces of trash and litter picked up every month. So that's something I'm excited about, but like, I found it a little bit difficult to prioritize it. But like, I'd love to at least have a game plan and a vision down. One, for me, but two, like, if something were to happen to me, like, this app just doesn't die.
Yeah, it's a manifesto. What you're creating is a movement, and I think it's one of the most powerful things that we can do for our lives and also in our business, right? Just try to, I always tell people, because I get asked all the time, like, how do I decide what kind of company should I start, especially in the software world? And one of the things I say is, what wrong do you want to right? Like, what's broken in the world that you just can't stand and that you want to spend time fixing that? Because without that passion or curiosity or interest in solving that problem, you're just not going to win. Because truth is, and I call this a universal law of knowledge, there's probably 3 to 4 other teams of people working on solving that specific problem right now that you don't know about because they're in the basement or the garage. And whoever cares the most about solving that problem is going to win. And that's Steve Jobs said this. I always thought that with Clarity, Google launched Helpouts, which is supposed to like crush Clarity. And now, oh my gosh, you've got Google in the same market. And I just asked myself, if anybody at Google, and they had a 60-person team working on it, if anybody there cared more about solving the problem of connecting entrepreneurs with other entrepreneurs over the phone than I did, and the answer was hell no, because I knew I would, if I had to put my head through the wall just to be successful, I would have done it, because that's how much I cared about solving that problem. And nobody at a company that's working as an employee cares at that level. So I love that you're working on that kind of project.
Thanks. Yeah, and I've done some research. I know there's other things that are very similar. A lot of them don't have a marketer, really. It doesn't feel like on their team. So And it's funny because I've always been a very like scientific marketer in terms of A/B testing and numbers, and now I'm just trying to like lean more into the artistic side of it, like reading some Seth Godin books like Tribes and All Marketers Are Storytellers / Liars, and those have been really helpful. So I always read physical books, paperbacks and hard copies, and um, I always have tons of notes in the margins, and over, it's like one piece per, like, this is a good story, S&D, like, S&D is swipe into play for me. So I'm going to go back through those books very shortly and kind of formulate that type of plan. And so something that you just said was interesting and reminded me of another, going back to the well. It's funny, our conversation was already set up through comments on your blog. You talked about not compromising, and so you even said like that you won't shovel snow. So like you have this like very clear, like I even give this advice sometimes. So like if you have a T and it's like tasks and dollar per hour, you say, okay, I'm worth $100 an hour, and anything that is below that, I'm not going to do it. So if shoveling snow is like a $20 an hour task, like I'm not compromising on the value of my time. And it kind of is also like what you were saying, like no one's going to care more than me. I'm going to put my head through the wall. I care about this so much. It's funny, I feel it sometimes myself, and in some of the entrepreneur Facebook groups I'm in, even some of the higher level ones, I see people talk about, I just feel like I'm not connected to my passion right now, or like, I can't really connect with like my why, or like maybe they're finding subtle ways to cheat on themselves or sell themselves short in terms of their value. So I'm sure it happens for you sometimes where like you feel like compromising, or like, you could, if you didn't have like some really strong internal whatever to do it. So yeah, I can't really think of the exact question I want to ask, but
well, I've got a few things I want to just comment on that. One, if anybody thinks that I don't get into my own entrepreneurial funks, you're crazy. Actually, last week's video on YouTube was about how to get out of the funk, right? Because it happens to all of us. And if you've ever decided to stay in bed and binge watch House of Cards or Game of Thrones and pretend like you're in meetings all day with your team, then you get what I'm talking about. And I've guilty. So the only difference with me is I at least can admit to where I'm at in that phase, and I just time block it. I just pretty much say, you know what, I'm going to give myself the day. I've been grinding for 2.5 months, and I'm just going to give myself 6 hours of the day, or sometimes 2 days, and just say like, but at this time, I'm back at my desk, I'm back cranking on my emails and producing in the world. So just want people to know, like I like everybody else have emotions and go through the entrepreneurial pendulum of business. On the kind of the no compromise or kind of honoring myself, people have a hard time when I say, okay, well, my hour's worth $100, but they're not able to generate $100 worth of revenue by not doing this other task. It still needs to get done. So the first thing you need to understand is humans have a bias towards not losing what they have versus gaining something better. So the best story I can tell you, and my dad's such a great example, and I love him, but he just makes me giggle sometimes. He owns rental properties, and he mows the lawn there. He has like 6 rental properties, and he still manages to mow the lawn. I ask him all the time, like, why are you doing this? You can clearly pay somebody else to do it. And he says, oh, I enjoy doing it. It's a good meditation. And then one day I was reading this book on behavior psychology, and they talked about this, bias towards loss versus gain. I said, well, Dad, would you mow the neighbor's lawn? So let's say it was $20 to do it himself, to save it. I said, would you mow the neighbor's lawn for 40? And he goes, no. Okay. Well, it's the same friggin' thing. And he's like, oh shit, you're right. So that hopefully will help people watching this to overcome that block in their brain saying, well, I got to do this $10 task because nobody else is going to do it. No, you need to figure out how do you get more leverage in your day. So I actually have borrowed this great framework from my buddy Todd Herman called the Entrepreneurial Scorecard, which really just shows you how to create these 4 columns of value in your day of tasks, and starts with $10, $100, $500, and $5,000. And you can just kind of split those columns into 2 and say this is in the business, right, doing the work, and on the other side, the higher 500, 5,000 is on the business. And you'd have to take his program to really figure out what your columns and tasks look like. But what you do is you actually, every 2 hours, the alarm goes off on your phone, and you write down your task and you give it a value. And at the end of the day, you ask yourself, did I have a $1,200 day or a $5,000 day? Now, this is not revenue generating. This is value creation. And if your goal is to build $1 million business in the next 12 months, in a year, then you need to create $5,000 value days with your time or you just won't trend in that direction. See, most people make the mistake of only ever measuring, and that's what I love about your work is it's very scientific, measure, track, improve. Most people don't have that discipline. They get their financials once at the end of the year. If they're better than that quarterly, we look at our revenue for our business every day. I mean, I have a dashboard that shows revenue per day. I can look at my goals per week, per month. And by doing that, especially for the entrepreneurial scorecard, on a daily basis, you get a feedback loop and you will adjust. And it's something I do with all of my coaching clients because I just have never, again, back to that daily practice, it's those things that compound. You picking up a piece of trash as often as you go out into the street. And if as many people do that, there's this compound effect that is going to get that bigger result. So, that's the reason why in my life, back to the no compromises, I do one of two things. Either spend time with my family or create value. That's it. I do not do things that other people can do because when I do that, I realize I'm taking away from spending time with my family or creating value for the world and leaving a bigger impact. And I wouldn't want to do that to myself or to the people that are depending on me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's crazy. Like if you have, and I fall into it too, like to have a limited view of saying like no one else is going to do this. There are 7 billion people on Earth, and you only need one. Sometimes you need a couple for a team or whatever. But like, I post stuff on Upwork, formerly Elance or whatever the other freelancing, Odesk, and I get flooded with people who are really good. And I used to have really bad control issues. Now I have bad control issues about like really wanting to do everything and like the whole thing. If you want to do it, if you want it done right, you have to do it yourself. But I've gotten better and better at delegating and outsourcing. And what I've done sometimes is I'll hire 3 people for the same job on Upwork or from whatever I find, and give them all the first step or the first 10% of a project and see who's the fastest, who's the best communicator, who delivers the best work, who's the easiest, who do I like. And sometimes the person who delivers the best idea or like the best execution isn't always the person that I end up choosing. There might be a better fit, but then we now have 3 ideas to choose from, 3 different ways of going about tackling the other 9 steps, the other 90%, because we got a great idea. So it costs 3 times as much for the first step, but you end up saving a lot, or at least getting a much better result.
And what's the cost of hiring somebody that turns out to be a total dud in 2 or 3 months, and then you got to rip them out of your infrastructure and then have somebody else kind of trained up? I mean, people don't realize what you talked about is actually part of a recruiting framework I created, and that's called the test project. And I've never hired. I have a rule that I can't work with you till I work with you. And it's a 10-hour project. And like you did, it's the same project for the different candidates for a role because I want to see all the stuff you mentioned. How did they collaborate with me? How did they communicate? What was the work product for the same role? See, people make the mistake of giving test projects, but they're different for each candidate. And then that way you have nothing to compare side by side. But in a world where you can pay $4 a minute to have somebody do research for you or do photo editing or video stuff, I mean, it makes no sense, or even record your screen giving the audio commands of what you want done and Dropbox to share that video to have somebody else execute it. I mean, everybody who works for me is way more accomplished and capable than I am at the stuff they work on. And that's why I hired them. Now, I'm very clear at how I give them directions and what the outcomes I expect, but that is something that leaders have to learn how to do.
Yeah, and so circling back, you gave an amazing answer, and so this is totally selfish because the thing that I was most curious about hearing was, so like on some days maybe you wake up, and maybe, because you said, you're not immune to any of this stuff, so like maybe some days you wake up and like your blood isn't like singing at like the prospect of working on your business or working towards your vision, like maybe you're just feeling like blah that day. Is that like the day that you give yourself permission to sit in bed and binge watch Netflix, or is that the day where you like have some way of being able to be productive in spite of it?
Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff I can kind of go down on that. Here's the deal: is the first is you need to know it's happening, right? And the second is what I do is I've designed the perfect day and the perfect week. We talked about when you mentioned that author suggesting that you kind of create a day that if they had to document this is the way Steve or Dan worked, that you'd be proud of that. So I've done that, and I've been doing that for years. And what I've learned is by deciding the night before exactly what my routine looks like. First thing I do is I wake up, I drink half a liter of water. Then I go and I work out. I have a green smoothie. I meditate. I do a 5-minute journal. I read for an hour. As long as it's funny how like I've already decided to do that stuff. So even if I wake up and I'm just not 100%, if I can at least get, those first few steps into it, once I get my workout in, it kind of resets everything. But then it's maybe throughout the day if I'm working on a major project. I mean, I've raised millions in venture capital. So like there's been days where I went in to pitch a really important investor, and at the end of the meeting, I knew we weren't getting his investment. And that was like, this big kick in the stomach, right? And maybe that was what kicked it off. But I just felt like the more that I stayed true to my routine, then the less that had an impact on me. Now, I also believe there's kind of two emotional states that you can have, and this is work from Cameron Herold. He wrote a book called The Back Pocket COO, and he calls it the entrepreneurial roller coaster, the uninformed optimism stage, and then the informed pessimism stage, right? So it's like, when you get that first idea and there could be nothing wrong with it and it's just awesome and all great, you need to do certain types of work in that state, whereas you would avoid other types of work when you're in the informed pessimism state. So, for example, if you're super high on life and things are going great, then you would do sales, you would do PR, press, marketing, all that kind of activity. What you would not do is any major financial investments, any major hiring, that kind of stuff. And then when you're feeling, the informed pessimism stage, that's when you would do things like, go into the closet and reorganize things, or look at your Dropbox folders and fix that, or work on some playbook or procedure stuff. I mean, it's you don't want to interact with people, because if you're like most entrepreneurs, we wear our feelings on our shoulder, our heart on our sleeve, and you don't want to have that impact other people, but you still want to be productive. So I just think it's really important to understand where you're at in that kind of roller coaster, and if you choose to work, focus on the stuff that you can actually do that's not going to impact other people, or binge watch House of Cards.
Yeah. I mean, there's several things that like I actually want to ask from there, but I know that we're eventually going to be running short on time. So I'm going to save it all for another day. And I've got two last things. One is going back to what we talked about on commitment. There's a line from a book that we both read called Love is the Killer App. And it says that when you have ham and eggs, the chicken is interested, so it laid the egg, but the pig is committed. And so we talked about that a little bit in some of your comments, and you said that book changed it all for you, is the direct line. Could you maybe explain a little bit about how that book changed it all for you?
Yeah, so Tim Sanders is the author. I owe a lot to Tim. What's a cool story about that is, I had never read a book. I was 23 at the time. Never in my life, like ADHD since I was 11, prescription drugs, all that stuff. Finally got off of it, but, just couldn't find myself to read. 2 failed startups, and thought, you know what, there's probably a better way to build a business, and it's in those books. And so that was the motivation. So I went to this bookstore in Ottawa, Canada, and not only was I not a reader, I didn't even buy a physical book. I bought the audio CD. So I was like, and there was this Love is a Killer App, because I'm a tech guy, and a killer app is kind of a software thing. And he used to work he was a COO at Yahoo. So I buy the audio book, and I start listening to it, and it just spoke to me. And I mean, that book, if there was one book that you'd want as the first book to set the foundation for you as an entrepreneur, you couldn't have picked a better book. I mean, he argued 3 elements. One, your network is your net worth. So invest in your relationships and be a good person. 2, acquire knowledge for your customer. So not even read books for yourself. This is what I really loved about it was, fill your brain like a knowledge bank for your customers, or the people you serve in the world. So go a step further and read for other people. And then finally, just be a good person, what he calls a love cat. I could never jive with that language, but, whatever. So it was just really don't be an asshole, be a good person. And so here's the crazy part. Read the book, 23, finally start my first company, Spheric. That company, super successful, 4 years, 150% year-over-year growth. And every year I would email Tim, and I would just be like, hey, Tim, I read your book, really appreciate it. Just want to let you know I finally made a decision to start another company. Next year, hey, we grew, we broke $1 million in revenue. Thank you so much again for your inspiration. I've read 25 books, whatever it was. And for, 10 years, 11 years later, I finally get on a Skype video chat with him 6 months ago. And turned out he was watching my YouTube videos and thought they were really good and wanted to ask me about it and just connect finally. So 11 years as a virtual mentor, a guy that wrote a book, probably had no clue that he would be speaking to a Canadian kid that grew up in a real troubled time and eventually found success in software. And so to me, that what's cool about it is I'm just such a big fan of helping people find that love for reading. I've read over 1,000 business books since then. It's one of the most important things I do every day. Like I mentioned, an hour a day easily. That Love is Killer app, highly recommended for everybody watching.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a great lesson there on consistency, like with you coming out with videos every Monday, but also for every year, for years, emailing the author of this book, even if you weren't getting a response. To keep on putting yourself out there, and even if like it's a rejection, so to speak, to stay connected with who you want to talk to, like what you want to express, because I'm sure it was mostly gratitude as well as then kind of like a celebration of what had happened through what he was able to share with you. And I'm sure you're going to start getting more and more of that with your videos and with whatever else you're producing, where people are coming to you and sharing their success. So speaking in that vein of things that you're creating, the last thing that we'll leave with is I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what you're creating, what you're about to launch in the near future, idea to exit, maybe who it's for, who it's not for. I'll stop reframing it and I'll leave it to you to talk about it.
Yeah, so my background software, I've helped over 50 plus companies raise venture capital, hundreds sell their business just through the strategy that I've learned doing it for myself, and then kind of counseling and providing these frameworks to think about that process, but really just like how to start companies. So like in the software world, I really think especially in the information product world, so online marketers, you see companies like Lead Pages, so the founder Clay Collins, I got to talk to Clay early days, Russell Brunson with ClickFunnels, Nathan Barry with ConvertKit, Mike Filsami with Webinar Jams. I mean, non-technical people building software companies. And there's a reason for that, is that the technology and the complexity has been really suppressed and made more approachable to everybody. I mean, 40%, this is an IDC research paper, 40% of SaaS businesses run on Amazon Web Services. And Amazon makes it so that almost for free, you can have your site running and scaling to the world for no cost, which used to cost millions of dollars in infrastructure in the past. All the tools that you would use to collaborate with somebody, from GitHub to Slack to InVision, they're all free to use, if not free to scale, or very cheap monthly subscriptions. So what's happened now is, and many people have talked about software eating the world, is every industry. It doesn't matter if you're a marketer, an entrepreneur in a traditional business, or even a technology entrepreneur that's got a business and can't find escape velocity. Your world is going to change, because never have you seen companies go from 0 to $1 billion in valuation faster. I mean, they call it the unicorn club, and there are like hundreds of companies now because of the evolution of entrepreneurship. So what I wanted to do was take everything I've ever learned about building, scaling, and selling technology companies and put it into a program. And I put together this free mini course that's launching at ideatoexitonline.com. And in there I talk about how do you come up with the idea, what makes a great product, how do you actually validate that with customers, how do you build a team. I pretty much put everything in there. I mean, when I launched it last year to my personal email list, people wrote to me and said, why are you giving all of this away? And I was just like, again, my free stuff's going to be better than everybody else's paid stuff. So, I mean, that's just video one. And then I talk about how to actually build a growth engine, which is my approach to actually thinking strategic about marketing. For example, there's this thing called OPN, or other people's networks, where you can leverage network effects to get distribution for your product. You can also think about shareable moments, which is a strategy I teach, which talks about what are the events or actions in your product that you can prompt a user to share to get more distribution for your product. So these are no-cost marketing initiatives that are feature-based. Then the last video I talk about how do you raise capital for some of the world's best investors, or if you want to do it from friends and family and do it right, and then engineer your exit. And I always joke with people because they're like, well, I want to bootstrap and I don't want to ever sell. And I'm like, that's cool, but whether you like it or not, someday you're going to have an exit. It's either you're going to be exiting because you died or your business fails, but there will be an exit, and you're going to either create a lot of value or no value. And I really want to teach people what I call value enhancers, and the way to look at your business, and what are those key metrics that if you focus on over the period of building your business, you're actually going to create a lot more value than a lot of people that don't. I mean, I know a bunch of entrepreneurs that have been in their business for 10, 15 years, and they think it's worth millions, and if you actually got it evaluated, it'd be worth like hundreds of thousands. It would be depressing to them. Not because they weren't capable, it's because they didn't know. And that's what I teach in that third video. So again, free program. I do to exitonline.com. I invite anybody watching this has a little bit of an inkling on building a technology software, SaaS product, mobile app marketplace to check it out.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds incredible, and I can attest to the value of free content. I mean, I've been commenting for years. It was the backbone of much of this conversation.
I really appreciate that too, Steve. And just so everybody knows, I respond to every comment, tweet, anywheres, everywheres. If you talk about me, I'm the guy replying, because to me, that's why I free up my time and have people support my life, so I can do that stuff, because that's really, again, what feeds my soul.
Yeah, I mean, that's like the thing that you can't like scale, right? Or like you can't automate, and
you can't scale caring. You either do it or you don't do it. It's like, to me, it's important that and this is what, I love about like Gary Vee, right? Early days of Gary Vee, 2008, emailing him, you knew he was responding, and he was getting crushed with thousands of emails. And that's just parlayed into the brand he's built today. And again, you can't fast track things. Sometimes it requires you doing things that don't scale in the slow roll. But the product and the output of that, the byproduct, is just indefensible. Like it's incredible.
Yeah, like with Kevin Kelly's 1,000 True Fans, like I always remember whenever, and I don't get a ton, but when I get tweets or emails from things I've created, I always remember that true fans are built one at a time, and that if someone took the time to read and then to reach out, that I wouldn't consider anything else other than.
Well, I want to share one more strategy, because I teach it in my Idea to Exit program. It's smile and dial. So every Thursday, and I just like Thursdays because it's kind of mid through the week, I'd call customers randomly and just talk to them. And I just think if you have customers, especially ones that are old customers you haven't talked to in a while, it's your responsibility to connect with them. And that, to me, is where the innovation comes. It's where the loyalty comes. That's where the word of mouth marketing comes from. It's just picking up the phone, talking human to human. I don't care if you're B2B or H to H. It's H to H, human to human. So big fan of smile and dialing.
Yeah, and that's huge for people who are millennials. I think a lot of people my age are like terrified of a telephone. Like they'd rather text or like do something like not like that. But get on the phone, people. All right, that was great. Dan, thank you so much for being potentially the very first guest on the Profit Hacking Podcast. Honestly, I love this conversation. And at some point about halfway through, I was like, I'm totally doing more of these because this is awesome. So thank you so much.
Steve, really appreciate you having me. Thanks, man.
Of course.